Getting ready to start for part 2 of today's plenary meeting, so please take your seat. And I invite as well the panelists and discussion participants for our next session to join the floor. So in terms of agenda, so if you can go back to the previous slide, just to let you know that in the next hour we'll be talking specifically about the case of the energy sector value chain, in particular the particular technologies, and then we'll have a break around 3 o'clock before we proceed with the final session for today, which would be on the local perspective for energy sector investment, taking the angle of cities and energy communities. So we've tried to prepare a really packed agenda for you, looking at the different angles, different topics, but without further ado, I hand over to Arne Lorenz from InnoEnergy, who is part of the Investors Dialogue for Energy team and who has prepared and will be moderating this session. So Arne, over to you, and thank you again to all the panelists for agreeing to take part today.
Thank you, Svetlina, and hello everyone for first session after lunch. On the topic of investing in the energy value chain of the EU, especially hydrogen and batteries, with latest changes on the panel, and especially the arrival of Philipp Offenberg. Maybe we should give this a bit of a twist towards green premium. Yeah. The value chain approach is about the cost of the end product that a consumer is paying for with a green premium and willingness to pay for that green premium. And we have a panel here today which is composed to bring different perspective on hydrogen and batteries, starting with Catharina in the first place, director at DG ENER for Green Transition and Energy System Integration. In the Commission since 1997, I read, so a long history in various functions, including regional and infrastructure. So welcome here on stage. Catharina will have the first intervention, giving us the chapeau and the umbrella. Then we have, in chronological sequence, Ilka from Dalwigk. Ilka, you're working at the European Battery Alliance as policy officer. You have been around since 2017 when the initiative started, helping to build up the ecosystem, leading the industrial stream of the European Battery Alliance, and involved in the operationalization, so the moment when the rubber hits the road and strategy turns into actions. Welcome, Ilka. Then to the right of me, Francois Gaudet. It's also a challenge to introduce your title. I would focus on you with the European Investment Bank. You're head of unit. You are a specialist on climate tech and in the EIB team on growth and equity finance. So specialist for climate tech financing at the EIB. The next colleague from the EIB, Alban, Vital. Yeah. And sorry, mixing up Alban. It's good that you could keep composure for so long, introducing it a fully wrong way. So Alban from CINEA, working with the Innovation Fund. So the Innovation Fund you have probably heard about. CINEA is the executive agency in charge of the implementation of the Innovation Fund. So Alban, you're dealing on a day-to-day basis, I would say, with the Innovation Fund implementation. Previous history in private banking, 20 years, I understand, since joining in 2022. So 1 year with the Innovation Fund already. And lately you were, I would say you are the hydrogen expert at CINEA. Correct depiction?
Yeah. I'm not the sole hydrogen expert. There must be quite a few of us.
Okay, good. And then finally, welcome on floor, Philipp Offenberg from Breakthrough Energy. Yeah. Philipp, you are a senior manager at Breakthrough Energy with previous experience in the strategy advisory of the Juncker cabinet, before joining Breakthrough Energy in 2020, so 3 years. And Philipp will have the third intervention of today, but we start with Catharina. Give us the chapeau, please. I heard there are no slides, so we'll be free speaking. As you prefer, you can stay here or you take this position up there.
Thank you, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think after lunch it's probably healthier to do the speech standing than sitting. On hydrogen, so towards the end of 2023, the co-legislators, so the European Council and the European Parliament, agreed on the hydrogen and gas markets decarbonization package. That is the last building block of the regulatory framework for hydrogen value chain following the infrastructure regulation on trans-European energy networks that had already been adopted a couple of years before. The definitions and obligations targets for renewable fuels of non-biological origin, this famous RFNBO, I think we can call it hydrogen for short, target that has been set under the Renewables Directive for both industry and transport, also entering into force quite soon. And then, of course, the delegated act that defines what is meant by renewable hydrogen when the electricity in particular is coming from the grid. And that depends on many reasons. So we believe that with these pieces of legislation, we have the regulatory framework in place whereby people, producers, the grid operators and off-takers can start planning how to, where from, get hydrogen for decarbonizing their processes and systems. There have been few investments yet in renewable hydrogen. Of course, we rely today on gas-produced hydrogen, but we need then to rapidly ramp up the renewable, and in the future we will also define what is meant by low-carbon hydrogen, but we don't yet have that definition. It was brought into in the latest gases package. So what do we need? We need investments in the hydrogen value chain, but we also need investments in renewables in order to have then renewable hydrogen. Infrastructure is a key element in this process. We do believe that after the initial phase where hydrogen will be produced, consumed in so-called industrial valleys, which will be relatively local, but quite rapidly we will also need infrastructure that crosses borders, that connects these industrial valleys, that bring hydrogen from where it is produced in a bigger scale, be it then in the North Sea, be it in the Iberian Peninsula, Southeastern Europe, or Baltics or Nordics, where we see quite some potential, and consumption centers are typically more located in the central parts of EU. So the investment needs to get all this going, to produce, to transport, and to consume 10 million tons within the EU produced domestically. The investment needs range between 335 and 471 billion euros all in all by 2030. Out of this, 300 billion would be needed for the additional electricity production from renewables. Internationally, because you know that in the REPowerEU, we also said, we acknowledge that first of all, we will not be able to produce all the hydrogen we will need domestically, but we will also need imports and also in order to have a competitive world market there. So internationally, we have estimated that something like 500 billion euros need to be invested in establishing the diversified value chains to enable these imports to the EU. Could be hydrogen, but could also be derivatives of hydrogen, like ammonia. The green premium that you referred to is, of course, there. The cost of renewable hydrogen is today more expensive than gas-based hydrogen production. So there is a need to make sure that those who offtake the hydrogen are and remain competitive in their processes and products. So in the EU, we are putting in place, in addition to the regulatory framework, a number of measures to help to support the rollout of this value chain. So first of all, we have approved more than 20 billion euro in public financing under various EU funds and programs to develop this ecosystem. This includes support under the Resilience and Recovery Fund, public aid for important projects of common European interest, Innovation Fund, Cohesion Fund, Just Transition Fund, and the Clean Hydrogen Partnership, among others, so quite a few. EU support for hydrogen project development can be made available also through other kind of programs, and I will just mention here, in addition to the previous ones, the Connecting Europe facility that supports then, on the one hand, the infrastructure, so trans-European networks, future trans-European networks for hydrogen, first time starting from end of last year, and then also the cross-border renewables element within Connecting Europe facility that could then support the production of renewable hydrogen. You have all heard certainly the word European Hydrogen Bank, and might already have wondered why I didn't mention it as the first element. So work to establish the bank has been ongoing. So we from ENERGY work together very closely with DG Climate, who is in charge of the domestic leg of the European Hydrogen Bank. And the bank aims at promoting the production of renewable hydrogen domestically, in the future also for imports. It has a role to coordinate, to match the demand and supply of refined hydrogen and blending it with existing financial instruments in support of concrete projects. And it should also provide demand visibility by bringing off-takers also into the table to discuss then where this hydrogen would be first needed. So on the domestic leg, there is a call ongoing worth 800 million on production and consumption of renewable hydrogen. We are working very hard at the moment also on making a similar approach to the import side, but that requires a little bit more work in order to find the resources to do so. On the international side, we are focusing our efforts today on what is called a Team Europe approach, whereby member states who are keen to be the front runners in the hydrogen economy would bring their resources into, for instance, the hydrogen bank and could benefit from the processes thereof that is managed by CINEA, so we may hear maybe more of it in the future, in a minute. So this as a way of introducing what is happening in the hydrogen world. We are at the beginning of the upcoming hydrogen economy. We know that the first installations will be in the industrial valleys, so used by industry. Transport will have to come next. So starting with the hard-to-abate sectors, and from there on, we will see later how far hydrogen will be spread in the economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catharina. You've mentioned a couple of points that I have noted down, like the value chain on hydrogen, the importance of off-takers, the massive amounts, and also in the very end you mentioned that there's the start of the hydrogen economy. So with that, I would like to hand over to Ilka to make the link to another industrial value chain for Europe in batteries, which is a bit more advanced than the hydrogen economy, and share your insights, lessons learned current state of play. Yeah? Also in contrast of what we've just learned from Catharina. The floor is yours.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having me here. I'm going to present, give you a short overview of the European Battery Alliance, the current status of the industry, and also the challenges that we currently see in this ecosystem. And I don't see, do you have the slides? Sorry? And here we go. We have been working since 2017 of really trying to build up this industry in Europe that by that time when we started, 2016, 2017 was virtually non-existing. We have today developed into an ecosystem covering the entire battery value chain from raw materials production all the way to cell production, applications to recycling. It is an open ecosystem with more than 800 organizations today, mainly coming from industry, but we also have research organizations, associations, decision makers, member states representatives represented in this European Industrial Alliance, which is a little bit an odd animal, I would say, in this landscape, and it was the first of its kind when it was launched. It has now become somewhat of a blueprint for industrial alliances on how the decision makers, in fact, can work not for but together with the industry, as Ursula von der Leyen framed it. And I think it's been a great success since we started. Just to give you a background, where we at InnoEnergy are involved, the European Battery Alliance you can consider as kind of an umbrella that is run by under the leadership of Maros Sefcovic. InnoEnergy is coordinating the industrial ecosystem. Then there's, of course, a level above us on the decision makers, both on EU and member states level. And there is a growing research and innovation community that has been established since then, where there's, I think, a plethora of different projects, initiatives. BEPA and Batteries Europe, Battery 30 Plus are maybe the ones that are more well known. But when we started, I think one of the most important tasks that we were given by the European Commission was, in fact, to develop an action plan on how to establish such an industry in Europe. And this work was done together with industry, together with decision makers, and it resulted in 49 very concrete actions that are threefold, addressing aspects covering, once again, not only the value chain from raw materials, but also social aspects on acceptance, on demand and market development. And all these actions were threefold, I could say. It was not only a finger pointing or a wish list for the Commission, you need to do this and that for it to happen, but it also contained a list on actions that could be done at member states level, but also commitments from the industry, really, what they could do to actually push and develop this industry in Europe. I think looking back in the back mirror, it's been quite a success. There's been a number of those actions that are then translated into the strategic action plan from the European Commission, namely, that resulted in a number of actual results, everything from the importance of raw materials that has been addressed in the Critical Raw Materials Act. I think one of the most innovative pieces of regulation, the battery regulation, has been a tremendous success for this alliance. And there are also a number of industrial projects that has kicked off since then. Taking a step back on when we started, it is really what I said. It's an industry that by that point of time was not existing in Europe. There were already signs that electrification, especially in the transport sectors, was about to happen. But Europe, by that time, did not have any cell production and supply chain issues. Where do we get the materials for battery production from? Was hardly even discussed. And just looking on stability, on why we wanted this battery also to have in Europe the knowledge to develop battery cells, on the importance of it, I think if you're looking at the automotive sector, it represents 7% of Europe's GDP, which can translate into 1 trillion euros. This is a staggering number. And when we looked at where the battery cells, where the EV actually is coming from, by that time already Asia played an important role. And we thought if we do not know how to produce the core within the EV transportation, the battery cell itself, this knowledge will be lost, and therefore all the direct or indirect jobs in the automotive industry are at risk as well. So I think one of the main objectives when we started is really to maintain jobs and welfare in Europe, which was very important. And when we came to the Commission and presented this plan, there we said, look at those forecasts, and very few people believed by that time that it actually was going to happen so rapidly. It's really a disruptive technology development that we're seeing. Once again, I think we were surprised ourselves when you're looking at the EV deployment. It happened twice as fast as the most aggressive predictions in 2017. Looking at the stationary storage, it's actually 4 times as high as in the most aggressive prediction, and especially those sectors like stationary storage, heavy-duty vehicles, are those sectors where we see most of the growth still today. When it comes to cell production, remember the first slide when we just looked, there was 0 production in Europe. I think we are very lucky that at least this sector has been picking up. We have now 30 announcements of gigafactories, mainly addressing the automotive industry in Europe at various stages. So this figure, as positive as it looks, should be taken with some caution. There are a lot of announcements, so-called PowerPoint projects on this as well, that still will need a lot of support and commitment from both private and public players to actually come to fruition. The darker blues, I think, are those ones that in many cases are Asian companies that are coming into Europe. They're replicating what they already know how to do, and then coming to Europe and building up a factory, whereas many of the European players, they still need to learn how to mass produce cells. And this is kind of an art. Where you need to mass produce a product at gigawatt-hour scale with parts per billion failure rates. And getting this failure rate down is a learning process, really. It's a lot of manual work involved in battery production, and we still are, in some cases, say 5 to 10 years behind the Asians on how to successfully get to the same output rates as those Asian competitors. And something more, I think in 2022, in August, when the US Inflation Reduction Act was launched, it really shook the European battery industry to its core. We got a lot of requests already after the launch. Does this really affect Europe? What is happening in the ecosystem? And just by following our announcements on cell production capacity, we could really see that at least in the short-term prognosis until 2025, capacities were going down quite significantly. And I think one of the factors is that, as I mentioned, cell production is quite a tricky business. So there's a delays in really ramping up. But also a couple of projects that moved over to the US simply because it's more attractive to produce battery cells in the US. And a lot of those, this US Inflation Reduction Act is, it's actually quite clever designed. It has tax incentives for customers. So you're looking at the EV part when you're buying a car, which is also very similar to subsidies in Europe, but it's also giving tax incentives for production. And that is a big difference for anything for OPEX costs that we have in Europe right now. And that makes it so very attractive to actually move your production over to the US. Coupled to those incentives, there are also domestic requirements that are quite stringent. So it will be very interesting to see how US is actually coping with that. They have, both for battery components and raw materials, quite ambitious targets to either source this material from inside of the US or from free trade agreement or countries from which they have free trade agreements with. Just to give you an example, when they started to introduce it, out of 97 eligible EVs or EVs on the market, only 18 would be eligible to receive the full amount of support because the raw material supply chains, well, they have a similar challenge than we have in Europe. They need to import material from elsewhere. One of the effects that, just to point out on the long-term effects on the US IRA that is maybe not so well known is the effect on electricity or levelized cost of electricity. As in the US Inflation Reduction Act, also wind and solar production is supported. There are forecasts saying that actually the cost of the levelized cost of electricity will be below everything we have in Europe. So once again, another factor that might be attractive for industry to move to the West. Resulting in that, taking everything into account, we made a calculation on production cost for a battery pack, compared this to Europe, China, US. And thanks to the IRA, US and China are almost at par. US in some cases are actually even lower than China, whereas the situation for Europe actually got even worse with rising electricity costs. So in terms of a global competitiveness situation, it is very difficult for Europe actually to operate in those times. Then we have geopolitical tensions and dependency issues that's still not solved. In the forefront, of course, our dependency is still on China when it comes to various materials. China announced last December that they would put restrictions in the market for graphite exports. Graphite is used for a very important battery component, and that, of course, is still a very challenging situation for us to address. The same is also in the downstream part, where we see now an inflow of Chinese cars coming and competing with European produced EVs. And I think that is another warning sign that we really have to step up our game. The European response, as it is called sometimes, to the IRA, I think you're all quite familiar with the Critical Raw Material Act, the Net Zero Industry Act, and also the TCTF, which are good measures, I would say, to actually mitigate some of the effects of the IRA. But it is a complex picture, and it's not as easy and fast to get to funding from different companies. It's in many times still on a member states level and not like a European approach to things. A lot of it is connected to permitting. I think we're seeing the first positive examples, but of course it is not as massive as the US Inflation Reduction Act. The battery regulation I already mentioned. I think this has been a decisive piece of this regulatory framework that has been put in place. Not all the details are there, but it gives some policy stability for the industry. And together with the European Green Deal, I think it really gives a signal to the market that there is still a good and growing market in Europe that brings investors to Europe. That might actually be one of the weak points for the US, that it's still not very certain if the IRA will survive an election of a new president with orange hair. I don't know. We will see. But I think this is really one of the strongholds of Europe that we should push and pronounce more stronger, and that's policy stability. Summarizing the different challenges we see along the battery value chain, especially in the upstream segment, just wanting to conclude, we see still a mismatch between funding and projects that are being developed in Europe. And this has mainly to do with the high risk profile of many of the raw material projects we have in Europe, and a reluctance of both public and private finance to go into the sector. At InnoEnergy, we decided that this is exactly where we should be and promote. So last week at Davos, we announced the establishment of a battery material fund for €500 million, addressing this gap in the value chain, focusing on domestic projects which are still at the development stage, and hope that we get a lot of strategic investors from the value chain that are dependent on those materials, and that is actually seeing here an opportunity to mitigate supply chain risks. Finalizing, maybe something else that we're doing at InnoEnergy is promoting startup companies, addressing once again holes and gaps in the value chain. Not only new companies that are coming to us and looking for support, and we help them getting this access to finance, but what we also do is actually building companies. Like Vercor has been a company that has been built outside of InnoEnergy because we saw the need for more European production in the space. I think I will finish with this slide and leave over to the next speaker.
Well, thank you. Not yet the next speaker. Not yet the next speaker. I would say we take the occasion to have a quick stock taking. Philipp, I saw you nodding many times during the presentation. What are your key takeaways? What made you nod?
No, thanks for the great presentation. I used to work in the Juncker strategy department when we kicked off the battery line. So I'm first of all personally happy it's gotten so far, and I think these are laudable successes. Vercor, Northvolt, potentially Northvolt opening another facility in Europe today, because fun fact, the local municipality where this new Northvolt project is supposed to be built today or yesterday voted with 1 vote majority that this should be built. So this was like a little village that this determined the success or failure of this project. So I think, this is all great, but then, and thanks so much for these amazing slides. I wish I had amazing slides like yours. But the one that really struck me was the battery production cost, right? So $127 per kilowatt hour in the US and China, $178 per kilowatt hour in Europe. And now, was it last week when the EPP said in their election manifesto they would get rid of this combustion engine ban? I thought the combustion engine ban was a good thing, but I think it will be hard to defend that ban when we're in a situation where we're obviously not competitive on batteries and probably not on electric vehicles. So that would be my question. What do we do now? How do we explain what's the industrial strategy to really make this happen and make sure that there'll be some European electric cars on the road in 2035?
Ilka?
My reaction was quite the opposite. I think it is quite risky still to feed the fossil driven cars. I think Euro 7 are now lifting the ban. I think giving the stability to the industries, this is really where we're going with net zero emission cars. It will force the industry to transform. If we always keep a little loophole open, there will still be following the same strategy as I do today, and this is addressing niche markets and applications like the premium sector, the plug-in hybrids and so on, and that is not where they're making money, and this is also not where the Chinese making money is, and I think we shouldn't be fooled there. It's like the mass production of EVs in China, they master already today to make profitable cars, whereas European manufacturers, they have higher entrance prices and make not profits, but they actually lose money on every car they produce. And as long as we kind of artificially trying to convince them, well, you still can keep on what you're doing, I think the harder it will be for the industry to really take a decision, let's change. There will be some Kodak moments in the automotive industry. I'm quite convinced of that.
Thank you for the response, Ilka. I also picked up on this, exactly this one graph about the cost of production, but I actually wanted to turn it to the investors that we have on panel. Francois, at the EIB, you have done a series of investments in the batteries value chain, notably the first one, Northvolt, but everything since then. So what is your take on the graphs and the presentation that you've seen?
I think what comes out is that both in hydrogen and in battery, these are nascent ecosystems, and the value chain is key. And of course, the EIB has been, stepping up to the plate with, very large support to Northvolt and its gigafactory and innovation in H2 green steel to bring them to the foray. But when we have the development of these ecosystem, I think one way to bridge our competitiveness is going to be through innovation, and through the value chain. We see a lot of innovation taking place. Of course, we were involved with Northvolt demo line at the very beginning to show what they could deliver, and same thing with Verkor. But recently we have announced a financing of actually a U.S. company, GDI, in the silicon anode space, and that's an interesting example where you have a U.S. company that sees the environment in Europe as conducive, partially because of our financing maybe, but also because the ecosystem and the quality and capacity of a European company to deliver on those innovations with the regulatory support of the Commission, making them see that this is a right environment. And there are plenty of innovations through the cycle. If you think of the material, the CAM with Battery Plus that we supported, which is from the raw material space. I mentioned the anodes, and then in hydrogen we have different membranes. We have manufacturing and the development of solid oxide electrolyzing. So I think through these we need to support the innovation, and we will continue to do it. But I think that's a partial response to the competitiveness aspect of those two ecosystems that we need to continue to support.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so when I hear innovation and ecosystem surrounding the investments, without being a great expert on what you mentioned as hydrogen values, is that what you had in mind, Catharina, or is it something similar?
Thanks. Yeah, perhaps I think you could look at the hydrogen valleys from innovation angle as well, and the value chain, because then what we have seen and what we have then estimated to emerge is those areas where there is usually often around an industrial area. So you have industry as the potential off-taker or already using grey hydrogen. You have the potential of bringing hydrogen to that location from where then renewable hydrogen is being produced. So you have everybody close to each other, and you can already start then the production consumption of green hydrogen there. The transport and then offering hydrogen from different sources, different locations, will come as a next step. So, but as the first instance, that's how we see you have everybody there, and innovation, of course, big part of it as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Alban.
Yes, so on the evaluation, obviously those two industries are both at nascent, although if you were looking at the graphs with like the 50 gigawatt factories, although they were obviously not all, they're at very early stage, but still it's reassuring to see that you've got plenty of projects. Maybe some of them will die, but you will have a similar picture if you're looking at hydrogen project. In reality, you've got barely, I need my 5 fingers to count the ones which are already operating in terms of producing RFNBO hydrogen. I don't even need my 5 fingers. But the reality is that the numbers that we see approaching, for example, the Innovation Fund and asking for help, because basically we'll then bridge something which is no more equity-like risk, where the debt to get, in order to get project finance debt is very tricky. But Innovation Fund is one of the tools that is useful for them to get this additional step in order to make the difference what is a nascent industry, equity-based mostly, into something where you've got more tangible productions with revenue stream, which years after years became more sustainable. And then you can, on the back of this revenue stream, build effectively the financing and the project financing that you need. So that will come with time. But the same pictures, I think, is appearing on both, that a lot of bubbles on the European charts, with most of them still being, well, not having crossed the financial close. But the reality is that this will emerge also as the way the technology improve, the way the scalability improve, the way we don't give them the choice and somehow the regulation force them to do so. When you combine those three factors together, then at that point you will have something which push both of those industries into the right direction. And that's very much when we look at the chart or the figure saying the cost of producing. Okay, you mentioned 178 US dollar versus 127. That's true. That's scary as a figure. The reality is that, thanks for us, this is not a frozen picture. And hopefully, when we improve the quantity of terawatt-hour produced through green energy, through green electricity, that will also lower down the cost. Everybody knows that in order to run an electrolyzer, 60% of the capex and the opex of green hydrogen is actually the electricity. So if we manage to actually reach our target on electricity, somehow the cost difference problem will partially solve by itself.
Thank you for this intervention. I think it's also a nice handover to Philipp to give us the view of breakthrough energy. Do you have the clicker?
Okay. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. So Breakthrough Energy's mission, just in a nutshell, we are a Bill Gates funded organization. We're not the Gates Foundation. We're a new entity that was created in 2015, and the organization's mission is to bring technologies from lab to market faster, to basically increase the number of available technologies to solve the world's climate challenge. This works great. Okay, so on this chart you see that for solar it took 35 years from lab to market adaptation. The green premium was mentioned earlier. That's the cost difference between a clean and a not clean product. It decreased very slowly, and obviously for the technologies that we are talking about today with a net zero 2050 timeframe, we don't have the same amount of time. But to deploy faster, we need to deploy much more capital. And what you see here on the slide is a significant investment in infrastructure funding gap. And the perspective that I want to take today is the perspective of emerging technologies. So many of these are developed in startups that don't have a long track record. So technologies we're talking about are often unproven in the market, and then require long development timelines, and for that reason, it's particularly difficult to raise capital for these type of technologies. I would say even more difficult than for the lithium-ion batteries that we just heard about. So I will today talk about a few examples from the energy storage space, and please mind, energy storage is not only batteries. There are many different types of batteries. I'll also talk about one type, but it's not just the batteries. Wrong button, great. One particular family of energy storage is long duration energy storage. That's a big focus of our organization. We're not only investing and interested in that type of technology, but it's really one of the families of technologies that we have paid particular attention to in Europe in the last years. It's becoming more important for several reasons. Technologies that we group as long-duration energy storage typically store electricity for minimum 10 hours up to seasonal durations. And as you see on the slide, there are four main families. So there are the electrochemical storage technologies, thermal, mechanical, and then chemical. So I brought a few project examples for today that you'll see on the next slides. Two of those projects are not funded yet. They are part of an initiative that we created with Siemens Energy last year, which is called the Energy Resilience Leadership Group. And the purpose of that group is to match corporates and startups to deploy emerging technologies in the field. It's not only about deploying these technologies, this group also has this component of using these projects as examples to have a discussion with finance, to have a discussion with policymakers, to really dive deep into what are the barriers to adoption of such technologies. So I will talk about those two, and then there's a third one that has been funded thanks to an initiative that we jointly run with the European Investment Bank, which is the EU Catalyst Partnership. Examples. So number one, this is a technology that's using an electrochemical battery storage system. The company is called ESS. It's US-based. At the moment, they are manufacturing in Oregon. They build these iron flow batteries for long-duration commercial and utility-scale storage applications. And the project I'm talking about is under discussion. This has a business plan. It's about the deployment of a 50 megawatt, 500 megawatt hour iron flow battery in a former lignite plant in eastern Germany. So this is quite a sizable project. There's a regional utility in eastern Germany, LEAG, actually now the third biggest power producer in Germany, or the second even. And they're transitioning from lignite to renewables, and the idea here is to install one of these batteries to help them make this transition to provide green baseload power, but also, and that's the interesting angle for us, to use this deployment, this first-of-a-kind deployment, to drive the installed system costs down to below $200 per kilowatt hour. So you see here, we provide a few numbers on these projects. It's publicly shareable. In phase one, they would build the first ever iron flow battery system that would be located in a building. This would be a 5 megawatt. Then in phase two, this would be expanded to 50 megawatt. They would also set up a European supply chain. And then post that project, you see on the graph on the left, the reasoning is that the scale effects drive the system costs down to below $200 per kilowatt hour. And that point, we would say it's a success because at that point you would have a new technology available commercially in the market. Yeah? And that's what our organization is all about. And now come the difficulties. So the market expectation here for such a project to be commercially viable is an electricity price of less than 12 cents per kilowatt hour, which would translate into less than 5 cents per kilowatt hour of storage costs. And that would correspond to a capex of 110 million euros. And now, however, of course, the actual capex stands at 237 million, which would represent storage costs of approximately 12 cents per kilowatt hour. So you see there's a difference of 110, 120 million euro in capex that somehow need to be bridged to bring such a technology to market readiness, to commercial viability. So in a way, this is a typical challenge. Yeah? So the first of a kind would bring down the cost, and this technology could be rolled out across Europe in various locations. But we have the problem of how do we get to these 10 to 12 cents per kilowatt hour in electricity price. And here really, this very quickly again comes to the governments. We haven't identified any viable funding instruments. It seemed that even for the Innovation Fund, this was too risky. In Europe, we haven't identified any viable funding instruments that could provide a grant to bridge this cost. And then the other issue is more with the electricity market, and that's a general long-duration energy storage problem. There's no remuneration mechanism whatsoever to make these type of projects bankable. So there are no capacity mechanisms that would allow for such a project to participate. There is not even one in Germany. There are no other markets this type of technology can really participate in. Next project is a thermal storage technology which can be used as a power-to-heat-to-power solution, but also power-to-heat. 100 megawatt, 10-hour plus storage. Interesting technology. It can provide the same flexibility as a gas peaker. It can be deployed as a standalone, co-located with renewables. It can be also used to repurpose coal plants, and that's the project I'm talking about. CapEx here to 300 million euro. They would use PPAs to discharge power and heat. They could actually provide auxiliary services. In some countries it would be eligible. Capacity payments, of course, would be great to have here as well. The project that they're discussing is the Soto de Ribera power plant, which is supposed to be converted from coal to also some sort of green power station. That's located in Asturias, Spain. And here, this would also be a first of a kind of Malta's innovative pumped heat electrical storage system at a utility scale, so 100 megawatt, would provide the same grid services as a combined cycle power plant. And here we tap into a different type of problem. So you see the technologies that they use. So they use a heat exchanger to store electricity as heat in molten salt. And then there's a turbine which is used to transform the heat back to power. All of that equipment is European. Most of that equipment exists. The innovation lies in the assembly of these different components in one new structure and one new technology. And because this is a new system, now we come to a problem that the EIB knows very well, especially recently. Commercial partners request performance guarantees, so bank guarantees to make sure that this thing actually works. And I mentioned the EIB because the EIB recently has created the de-risking facility, so this counter guarantee facility for the EU wind supply chain, which was a direct follow-up and a very quick follow-up from the wind power package that the European Commission put forward. We are very supportive of this instrument because it will be crucial also to enable the wind supply chain to deliver projects, because they, in a way, face a similar issue. So, for instance, take Siemens Energy alone. They have an order book of 110 billion for wind. And commercial banks are at a certain point unwilling to provide that many performance guarantees. So here the EIB is stepping in and backing that up, to put it in simple terms. For Malta, coming back to the project that I mentioned, and for other emerging cleantech companies, the issue is slightly different. So we're talking about new technologies, new companies. There's limited collateral. There's a lack of an established credit history. So these companies, like Malta, cannot really finance guarantees at a reasonable cost. Instead, they have to take their quite precious working capital and tie it up in collateral. And with that money, of course, they could do better stuff like building more projects. So here the plea to the Commission mostly, I think the EIB sees the problem. The plea to the Commission is really to extend this guarantee facility that is being created or was created for the wind power supply chain, also to emerging technologies, most notably to long-duration energy storage technologies, but also then other technologies in the hydrogen space, and Power-to-X would probably be good candidates to be covered by such a guarantee facility. So let's end on a positive note. There's also one long-duration storage project that was funded. Here the company is called Energy Dome. Their technology manipulates CO2 and moves it basically between its gases and liquid phase. So the CO2 warms up, it evaporates, and then expands and turns a turbine that generates electricity. Storage duration 8 to 24 hours. And this project here is located in Sardinia. It's a 20 megawatt CO2 battery, which can provide power for 10 consecutive hours. And this one is funded. Thanks to a cooperation between Breakthrough Energy and the EIB, which is the EU Catalyst Partnership that was created a couple of years ago. and will mobilize a total of 840 million euros between 2023 and 2026 to deploy and commercialize innovative technologies like the Energy Dome 1. And the Energy Dome project is one of the first one that was funded. So the Catalyst program will provide a up to 35 million euro grant, and the EIB provides 25 million euro in venture debt. So a very good example of public-private collaboration to bring such a project to commercial reality and make such a technology available in the market. To close, I mean, I think the examples have shown there's a bigger need beyond this one project which was funded. There are many of these technologies that have a CapEx or some sort of funding gap, and we really need to think harder about what kind of vehicles we can build, maybe at the intersection of public-private, maybe also how more institutional investor money can be brought into the space to be able to unlock more of these type of projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Philipp. I think with that, I'm immediately looking at Francois, especially on the aspect of performance guarantees, which is a concept that I've heard a lot. It originates from the wind package. So could you re-explain for the audience, because I assume many have heard about performance guarantees, but I understand it's a particular solution for a particular sector. Is it also applicable to storage and hydrogen from your point of view? So please re-explain and make the transfer.
Thank you. I think when we think about these guarantees, it's important to have clear in our mind it's the what and the who. So the what is basically you have corporates that are manufacturing goods, and when the promoters want to start a project, they ask them when they get into their production line for a deposit as an advance towards the equipment that will be prepared. Why do producers do that? It's because when they start the order, it has working capital implications. So please provide me with the funds so I can buy material to start delivering your order. So that's one type of advances, and usually the promoters says, well, I'm happy to give you an advance, but please provide me with a bank guarantee to make sure that you will deliver the goods or that my funding is not at risk, because this is a large amount of capital. And therefore, banks turn around and provide the promoters with a guarantee. Yes, your deposit is here, and here's the guarantee that either goods will be delivered or you will be returned your deposit. So that's one type. Then you have into the implementation of the project, the goods are manufactured, they're being delivered, and the promoter, again, starts making quite significant payments towards the implementation of the project, but he won't see his project finalized anywhere between 6 to 18 months, sometimes a bit more. And therefore, while he's doing those payments, he's asking the group of conceptor and manufacturer of the equipment that is that are required for his project a performance guarantee. Please guarantee to me that project will be delivered on time, at cost, in specs, so that my financing is not at risk. And therefore, banks issue again a guarantee to ensure that these conditions are met. Now, so this is what we're talking about. There's also long-term guarantee performance, but let's leave those aside. And then the whom. So you mentioned Siemens. Siemens has a large order book. It's scaling up and growing in that business, and it's a large corporate, and there are many others. We can think of other windmill manufacturers or some large cable producers that are stepping up to this renewable capacity that we're building up. And that has important working capital implications. So again, they also ask for deposits. They are also asked for guarantees for that, and they deliver on projects, and they are being asked to deliver guarantees against the performance of those projects. On those large corporates, what we're seeing in Europe as a bottleneck is that there's a reduced number of banks that issues those guarantees, and they are starting to face, given the growth and the exposure, what we call single obligor limits. So for one counterpart, prudent banking rules requires that they fix an amount upon which they won't go beyond on that single exposure. And that is starting to reach limits with a number of corporates and for a number of banks. And therefore, what EIB is doing is that it will come through banks. So it's an intermediated product. So we will go through banks and we will say, banks, for these wind project equipments, we will take away from your exposure and we will take upon our balance sheet this exposure, and that will free up capacity in the market. And that is being put in place. There will be large allocations to it, and we're already quite advanced on developing this project. Now, when it comes to the people like Malta or other innovative companies, as Philipp mentioned, these people do not have the same type of balance sheet. They do not have the same type of track record, and their technologies are also of a very different evolution than what we're talking about in the wind sector. And therefore, that poses a bit more of a complex issue as to which risk are you taking. And we do understand that for them, when they get deposits, the bank are not willing to take their risk, and therefore are asking for the same deposit to be put as guarantee against that issuance of this bank guarantee, which is counterproductive to why they ask for those deposits, is to finance their working capital. And that's not very useful if the capital they receive is tied up in these deposits. And similar issue with when it comes to the performance guarantees, these are, need to be funded, and equity is expensive. Now, we're looking into the issue, but the challenge there is that these are quite high risk profiles in terms of corporates, and there we will need to discuss with the Commission what kind of support is required for such deployment, because the amounts are important and the risk profile is quite different than under the wind package. So that's, in a nutshell, where we are on this.
Okay, thank you very much for explanation and elaborating. I'm looking at the remaining panelists. Would you have any questions at the moment or statements to make? Otherwise, I would open the floor to the audience.
Maybe have one thing that just to feed back on what we discussed earlier is that it is true that in a number of things, the demonstration is important, and then as we deploy, price will go down. But there are, as you mentioned, in relation to hydrogen, there will always be an OPEX factor, which is the cost of the electron. And while Europe works to deploy more renewable energy and making that cost competitive, when you electrolyze it and having that target of having, I think people have in mind €1 per kilogram kind of target price, which is a bit of a benchmark against this fossilized version of hydrogen. Innovation will come, it will help, but I think the regulatory environment is important, because now we're seeing a number of projects coming, being designed, but they're not passing the FID. They're not passing the final investment decision because of the delta of the fossilized versus green hydrogen, and the linking to this is the question of the offtakes. And I think that, Europe is doing a great job as putting the direction through, but I think that, supporting that further in terms of regulatory framework so that people are committing, so that projects have visibility and are implemented is something that is really important.
Thanks. Maybe just a piece of information. Philipp, you referred to batteries and remuneration mechanisms. So I wanted just to mention that the electricity market design that was also very recently adopted by the Council and the Parliament brings forward an obligation for member states to assess their needs in terms of flexibility, and this in different time frames, so very short, minutes or hours flexibility to a couple of days, and then to the famous winter without sun, without wind, and very cold. And based on this needs assessment, member states then would need to set an indicative target for themselves on how to bring about, how to address these flexibility needs. And here we can speak about demand response and storage, so including also then battery storage. And then based on that assessment also draw up support schemes which may be part of a capacity remuneration mechanism or can also be outside as independent or individual remuneration mechanism. So this will come when the electricity market design will be implemented. Of course, when member states will look into what kind of solutions they look forward, they will weigh the risk of highly innovative projects versus the security of supply that they are seeking with this instrument. Thanks.
Yeah, we had, before this energy dome project went through, there was a discussion in Italy with the TSO Terna, who had launched an auction for flexibility of some sort, which completely overlooked solutions like the one that Energy Dome provided, especially the durations that they provided. And another worrying thing that we see now in Germany is this power plant strategy where suddenly gas peakers and so-called H2-ready gas peakers are back. And again, I mean, these long-duration storage solutions are completely overlooked, and I get it. Yes, they're expensive, right? There's a risk. The technology cost needs to be reduced by someone. Someone has to pay for that. But I think what is missing is really a strategy to guarantee the first deployment of these type of solutions, to have other options, more options in the future than the classical fallback where we seem to go to every time, like the gas power plants.
Maybe just something also as an observation when it comes to de-risking projects and the role that the European Battery Alliance played for the establishment of this ecosystem. And I think a lesson learned from many of those projects that we have been following is really this, that they are embedded in an ecosystem and are actually working actively together with their customers. Their off-takes agreement, but in many cases it goes much deeper than that. There is actually co-development, and I think this is something that is very important, that you also sustain a long-term commitment to the sector, both when it comes to supporting innovation, research, and to actually allow, especially a nascent industry like batteries or hydrogen, to give it time to develop together. And this is not done over a mandate period. It has to be much longer than that to actually build those relationships, so those networks of actors coming together. And I think this is another thing of also de-risking a project. And I think also in discussions with EIB, off-take agreements is also something that is positively viewed by you. Looking at those guarantees, is the raw material sectors something that you're also investigating more actively now, or?
Well, the focus right now is on all the verticals of innovation and innovators. When it comes to raw materials, the focus is on innovation. If it's a bit straightforward mining, we hope the market will fill the gap. Where we see our added value is on more critical, technological risk performance. Smaller startups that have less of a balance sheet. That's where we see as our added value. It also has, when you start talking about less innovative, but still very required large capital intensive endeavors, such as some recovery of critical raw materials. It has very large budget implications, which, policymakers can decide if they should be prioritized. But if you think of critical raw material, we think we have more added value in synthetic graphite or new graphite applications than the standard box mining.
Okay, Alban.
Just wanted
just to say, after Alban, I would make a cut and open the floor to the audience, so also there are a few minutes available for the audience to ask questions and get them answered. Alban.
On the question on the financing and which projects are likely to actually materialize, obviously when we were talking about this green premium, so the gap between production of a grey product versus production of a similar green product, and typically on the hydrogen world, what you see is that yes, grey hydrogen between 1 to 2 euros per kilogram, while if you look at the green hydrogen, then the range is very big, but broadly between 4 to 9 euros per kilogram, depending on methodology for your levelized cost calculation. But so there is, even in the best case scenario, something that looks around 2 euros to gap between the 2 euros per grey hydrogen at the top end and the 4 euros at the very bottom end of the green hydrogen. And who are likely to be the ones that are passing this threshold first? Probably integrated actually companies, so literally where the companies that are already using hydrogen either in their ammonia production system or in the refinery of their oil productions, and which have this hydrogen as something which is some kind of a byproduct or an in-between product in order to reach what is their end product, and which represent a cost of the overall cost of production, which is probably slightly lower. So if those are the first one actually to make the step to pay this extra green premium because they want to actually improve the CO2 efficiency of their overall production chain, and then on top of that manage to get some of the grants which are distributed either on a regional or a European level, then those are the first projects which are likely to emerge as significant in size in terms of green hydrogen production. And that's true that when we look at it, and you look at 1 versus 9 in terms of the lowest grey hydrogen cost per kilogram versus 9 euros per kilogram in many of the LCOH public cost estimation you can find, the gap looks very, very big. But it's going to be something gradual, and hopefully we can start with some easier industrial project, probably mostly related to the industry rather than to transport in terms of hydrogen. That will be the first one to actually anchor and gradually increase this green hydrogen production.
Okay, thank you, Alban, for sharing those insights on where you see the nucleus emerging. And with that, as promised, I would open the floor to the audience for questions. We have around 15 minutes left. Giovanni has... So we have an online question. I will read out. It comes from Thomas Raksim. Energy security goes hand in hand with resources-minerals to build it. How are we considering acquiring this? I would say there is a policy angle and a business angle. I see some nodding heads already. So who wants to go first?
Thanks. Maybe I start. I mean, you're absolutely right. We need to have the full supply chain secured so as to have then the products, be they then hydrogen electrolyzers or anything else that we are speaking about here. So the Commission has been quite active. So we have produced the Critical Raw Materials Act. Net Zero Industry Act is currently in the co-decision process. And then we have, also for ensuring European production where necessary, CBAM, taxonomy, and many other tools. So I think there is a lot of elements already on the table that should ensure then access to the raw materials, equipment, and other things that we need. I would, of course, be very curious to hear if anyone in the panel or in the audience identifies that something is still missing, but that would be at least the rapid answer.
Picking up on the raw material and supply chain issues that we have, as pointed out, I think there are resources available in Europe that we should actually start to develop. We recently have seen that there is a lack of permitting coupled to finance because there is a high risk profile when it comes to public acceptance issues, but also a lot of resistance locally to develop the mining industry in Europe again. And I think that is really something to consider if we want to have this green and digital transition, to have this NIMBY approach really, that mining is still perceived as a very dirty industry, that that should not take place in Europe. It's also an ethical question, I think, in a fair and just transition to keep this over to other countries. Is this really the right way to go to Europe? In my opinion, there are a couple of reasons why we actually should actively start engaging in mining again. And one is, I'm very happy to hear this, a focus on innovative and sustainable mining technologies. I think for developing those kind of industries, we need to have test beds here in Europe. And coming from Sweden, we already have cases like this where there is electrified mining equipment developed. There are studies going on biodiversity, on how to actually, after the lifetime of a mine, how to restore it and things like that. And I think if we lose this competence, this skills also, it will be very hard for us to push for sustainable mining in other countries outside Europe. So more innovation. I think mining, as you put it, the industry should take care of, but it's not mining as usual. I think we must do better than that, and I think there more support for innovation in the sector is dearly needed in Europe.
Philipp?
Yeah, agree on mining. Also, the beauty of new technologies is that sometimes they don't need some of these critical raw materials. I mean, the examples I gave, right? One is an iron flow battery, so it's not vanadium, it's not lithium. The other one comes with equipment that is produced in Europe and molten salt, so also not very critical. Then what happened to this raw materials club with the United States? I think that was a big disappointment last year around the EU-US summit, when everyone thought they would agree on some sort of cooperation in that space. I really hope that after all these elections happening this year, that we can get back to that and somehow team up efforts.
Okay, thank you. I hear we have a question from Amy from the audience. Amy, could you quickly introduce yourself and then ask a question, please? And to whom, if any special person should answer? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Amy Radelberger. I'm working for Wiener Stadtwerke and ENERGY, so the utilities companies in Vienna. I have a question for Philipp, actually. I noticed, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Breakthrough Energy Catalyst program has funded 2 projects since its initial kind of since it entered into operation at the beginning of 2022. To me, that sounds not very many. And I wondered if you're able to share with us why only 2 projects have been financed to date. And we've had some, for example, we've had some running themes today, like risk. And I wondered if there's anything you can talk to us. And a little plea from myself, if possible. On the Breakthrough Energy website, it's just one page, and it would be great if we can see some contact information, even if it's an information box, and further information. It's like the secret financing program. Thank you.
Great. We're always happy to forward requests. Yeah, it went into operation 2022. Now it's beginning 2024. We funded the Energy Dome and then Ørsted e-methanol at the same time. Those were quite big tickets. I mean, this takes a bit of preparation. We're also not 100 people on that team. The EIB is also doing their job on that end. So, I mean, I'm really not the project finance person, but to me this doesn't seem like it was extremely long, especially considering nothing else is happening in the space. I'm sorry. It's not that there are many other funders, or that many other projects are getting funded. So I feel like that's a reasonable timeline. But we're happy to forward requests to the colleagues, and I think the EIB also wants to comment.
I mean, we are a partner, and we are following the lead of selection of projects from Breakthrough. But I think you need to see that, you know, this is a program that provides both risk capital and a grant component. The resources are important, but they're not illimited. I think that Breakthrough is doing a great job at selecting projects and carefully looking at those that have replication, cost reduction, and prominence in the market. And that takes, you know, time to consider. Then these projects need to be matured, and then they come to financing. So I think, yes, it might sound like a time, but you know, 3 parties, the Commission, Breakthrough, and EIB had to come together. Projects needed to be found, accepted, and implemented. So the track record is it's going to accelerate, but yeah, I think we're doing the best we can to accelerate them.
Yeah, you need to select them carefully, and also please bear in mind there is one team that's also covering the US, so there were a few projects more there. There's also a partnership with the UK, so Europe is one of them, and we're really happy that now we have these two great projects, and I promise you there will be more.
Okay, good. Question to the back right.
Yeah, good afternoon. Davide from Genie Finance. I wanted to circle back to that part that Francois from the EIB discussed about the needs for guarantees. Because when it comes to equity investments, development of new technologies, asset-based portfolio of projects, this is really fundamental. So just making a little bit of thinking a little bit out of the box, I was thinking, would it be possible a line of work for the EIB in the line of developing something like a guarantee fund, either a European level or a national level, where somehow these guarantees are mutualized and benefits from the fact that there are a multitude of actors that would participate and contribute, so the risk profiles go down, somehow replicating what the EIB and the European Commission already did in the past. For example, with the private financing for energy efficiency, if something like that could be developed for equity risk. And one iteration more, and then I'm done about that. But like I was thinking, like now, for example, in Spain, where my company is based, the EIB is taking over the resilience fund, the regional resilience fund, with 19.5 billion of asset under management for the next few years that needs to be deployed. And so I was wondering if a chunk of those 19 billions could be set up to establish a guarantee fund where either equity players like venture capital fund or startups that have to put those guarantees could say, hey, I put here in this fund 10% of the guarantee that I need, and then the fund will provide this cover to the banks that need those. Something in that line. Just thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. I'll take the second one, which is kind of simpler to answer. I mean, the RFF allocation will be directed towards what the member states wants us to direct it. So they have a big say in how we deployed and on what we deployed. And if they told us that this is a key priority, then we would put our head towards it if they provide us with the risk allocation for it. So that's one thing. Now on the mutualization, when again the first part of the WIN program, we have rated corporates, and they have their own risk in there, and that's what we will go for. When it comes to more innovative company, yes, of course, part of the thinking is going to be with our with the Commission that will be sharing in that risk. Is of course we're going to look on the matrix of risk allocation, the mutualization of these different risks, and the probability of default and being called on them. So that will go into the thinking. Now, in terms of funds, it is beyond my remit. Our involvement with funds is more done with the EIF, and they are looking at different solutions, but I wouldn't be able to right there to inform you.
Thank you. Just Vincent Touvelin from RTE and ENSOE. Thank you for the discussion. We have this supply chain issue for the electricity grids technology, which is also a very complex sector. It's not just one product. And we have the problem of having a strong industrial basis for having kind of return of investment on all the investment we will do in the grids. And that would be a shame that all this money go to outside Europe, I would say. So the real question now to be addressed, and I think it's kind of question in the grid action plan of the Commission, is how to do to strengthen our industrial base in Europe for this type of technology, which are part of the net zero list, whatever, where we look at Parliament's or Council list, I think it stays in it. My question, so first the remark is, let's work on that. It's really important if we want to be in time in our investment, because if we cannot buy the necessary equipment, we won't be on time to realize our investment program in the grids. And second, I would just, I think we have to think of it in the working group of the ID-E, and there's an action set by the grid action plan of the Commission. But what in your view would be the best way forward? Would it be to build a kind of alliance like in the battery or solar equipments that would be successful? Would it be to think about the guarantee schemes that was just mentioned, but focused on this specific areas? Just happy to hear your views on that.
I mean, I think you mentioned this morning that the challenge with the grid, it's regulated aspect, which makes the interaction with the private sector and its innovators, also acceptance by the grid of innovative solutions requires a long lead time and a lot of demonstration to show the resilience. So that's one challenge. But we are definitely, in terms of innovation and financing of that innovation, looking at solutions for the grid, mostly on determination, so things of virtual power plants, and also the vehicle to the grid, as it will contribute to, the grid difficulty solution. But when it comes to manufacturing, I think that's what you want, so that these solutions are available in Europe. I think the Commission has enabled under InvestEU with work with the Net Zero Industrialization Act to identify subjects and allow the involvement of multilaterals and national promotional banks and member states to support the manufacturing of these segments of the private sector for servicing your industry. So there are tools out there to support them.
I would just add, it's a drop in the water, but it's still a big drop, I hope so. So the Innovation Fund is around 40 billion of dotations. And one of the, obviously, that's far away from the 500 we need just for the hydrogen, but still it's one drop. But one of the key criteria is that the industrial project obviously takes place in Europe. That's a prerequisite of any project. So I know it doesn't secure the raw material or the component to be actually developed in Europe, but at least it helps into making sure that there is an industrial anchorage which sit within the EU or within the EEA, as the case may be, and that you've got also the knowledge and the jobs which are somehow being stay in Europe.
Then that would be nice that the industry of the electricity grids could be eligible to the innovation funds. I'm not sure it is at the moment. It's for generating, decarbonized generation, that part of things, but not for the mature technology in our grid industry.
You're right. So on the grid itself is not specifically one of the elements of the innovation fund. I guess, but there is so many of the projects which are connected to the grid in terms of batteries or in terms of using the energy from the grid that, okay, somehow it's not an answer to the grid, but it's an answer to a lot of projects which are tied and literally would not be able to see the light without the grid.
Maybe their contribution then on the grid action plan in a way. So I see two elements there. One is the manufacturing of the cables, so the grids that then system operators implement, and that's where the Innovation Fund can play a role in the manufacturing side, so that we keep that in Europe, because we are quite a leading producer, especially of the DC cables. But then when it comes to implementing, building the grids on the ground, and there indeed it is, it's a regulated sector, there is a remuneration foreseen. But what we have identified is that now that we really need to speed up the implementation of the grids, not only on transmission but also on distribution level, this speeding up puts constraints on the regulatory framework. And that's where then support could be needed, and there where Connecting Europe facility has been supporting quite a number of interconnectors until now. Very small fund, so let's see vis-a-vis the needs that are there for the next financial period, but that is something where we see that even in a regulated sector where there is a remuneration foreseen, the speed of implementation is such that we do need financial support, and that can be in the forms of grants, it could be in the form of financial instruments, guarantees, or other kind of things, but definitely something that we really need to explore much more because of the need to speed up on the implementation.
Okay. Thank you very much for that answer. You still come? No, actually not. So we have made quite a journey today. We started off with 2 industrial value chains on batteries and on hydrogen. We ended up with the grids. 5 minutes after time, so I would close it now. Encourage you to continue discussion. Thank you very much for everyone on panel sharing your thoughts and your questions from the audience.
We are now having a coffee break until 3:20, so that's in 15 minutes. Please be back then for the final session for today on cities and communities. Thank you.